Sarah Mitchell counted the bills one final time under the sodium glow of a Portland streetlight, her fingers numb despite the September warmth. $43. 15 months of waitressing shifts, every tip dollar hoarded in an old jewelry box, now reduced to two 20s and three ones crumpled against her palm. Maya's weight pressed against her hip. 5 years old and silent in that way children get when the world stops making sense. Three garbage bags slouched against a fire hydrant held everything they owned. The phone in Sarah's jacket that showed 22% battery, no charger, no plan beyond the arithmetic spinning through her engineer's brain. Motel 6 would take $38 for 2 nights, leave 5 for food, then homelessness in 72 hours. Or she could buy 2 Greyhound tickets to Bend for $28 total, gamble 15 on a taxi to a house she'd only seen once at age 10, a structure likely condemned by now. The Carter family home sat dark behind them, windows blank, the porch light Catherine had left burning for 18 months now extinguished. Sarah had watched it click off from the corner, understanding perfectly. The light had never been for her anyway. Maya's voice came small and careful, already learning not to ask too much. "When do we go inside?" The question landed like a fist in Sarah's ribs. She knelt on the sidewalk, eye level with her daughter, searching for words that wouldn't be lies. "We're going on an adventure, to see Mommy's grandfather's old house, in the mountains." "Is Grandma Catherine coming?" "No, sweetheart, just us." Maya's fingers tightened in Sarah's hair, a tell that meant she understood more than she should. At 5, she'd already learned the language of abandonment, the grammar of doors closing. 18 months earlier, Sarah had been a structural engineer pulling $72,000 a year. Michael Carter's mom, a woman with a retirement account and a coffee maker that ground beans fresh each morning. Then Michael's heart had stopped during mile 18 of the Portland Marathon, 32 years old, gone before the EMTs got his shirt open. The memorial service had filled Providence Park's chapel to capacity. Catherine Carter had held Sarah's hand through the eulogy, whispered that family takes care of family, that Sarah and Maya would always have a home. The company terminated Sarah's position 11 weeks later. Budget cuts, they said, though Sarah had watched them hire her replacement within a month, a man without a grieving widow's tendency to stare at spreadsheets without seeing numbers. Michael's life insurance sat frozen in probate. Catherine's lawyer arguing that the $50,000 should fund a trust for Maya with family oversight, meaning Catherine's oversight, meaning Sarah had no access to money her dead husband had meant for emergencies exactly like this one. Sarah's savings lasted through January. February brought the eviction notice. March brought Catherine's invitation, delivered with a white smile and the unspoken price tag Sarah wouldn't understand until much later. The first 6 months had felt like rescue. Sarah contributed $800 monthly from her waitressing income, cooked dinner for the household, kept Maya quiet during Catherine's afternoon bridge games. Ryan Carter, Michael's older brother, had seemed almost kind in those early weeks, asking after Maya's adjustment to kindergarten, offering to help Sarah update her resume. Lisa, Michael's younger sister, stayed distant but civil. Sarah told herself they were all navigating the same grief, that time would smooth the rough edges into something resembling family. Month 7 brought Ryan's job loss, his accounting firm downsized in a merger, and suddenly the house felt smaller. His comments sharpened at dinner, observations about grocery bills and utility costs, suggestions that Sarah might find full-time work, as if 60-hour weeks slinging hash wasn't full enough. Lisa's divorce finalized in month 9, and she moved back into her childhood bedroom with suitcases full of bitterness and a lawyer's letter demanding Michael's life insurance be split among all the Carters, since Maya was Catherine's granddaughter, and family assets should benefit everyone equally. By month 13, Sarah was paying $1,000 rent, working split shifts at Frank's Diner in a late-night Mexican place, sleeping 4 hours between jobs while Maya learned to entertain herself in the small bedroom they shared. Catherine's tone had shifted from sympathetic to administrative, a landlord managing a tenant who'd overstayed goodwill. Ryan started calling Sarah's work ethic into question, pointing out that she'd had career options before getting comfortable living off Carter generosity. Lisa made comments about women who married for security and then played victim when circumstances changed. The final 3 months were a slow-motion car crash Sarah couldn't stop watching. Catherine demanded Sarah take over care for her father, an 86-year-old man with advancing dementia who needed help bathing, dressing, eating. Sarah added home health care to her resume, told herself this was what family did, ignored the way Ryan and Lisa had mysteriously become too busy for their own grandfather. The insurance money remained frozen, Catherine's lawyer filing motion after motion, while Sarah's free legal aid attorney struggled to keep up with paperwork. Every cent Sarah earned went to rent, food, Maya's school supplies. She stashed $20 weekly in the jewelry box, dreaming of first and last month's rent on a studio apartment somewhere far from the Carter house, from Portland, from the smell of Catherine's disappointment every time Sarah walked through the door. September 15th, Sarah's shift at the Mexican restaurant ran late, a bachelor party that closed the bar and left her cleaning salsa off the ceiling at 1 a.m. She missed the last bus, walked 40 minutes home in her grease-stained uniform, arrived at 6:20 instead of 6. The garbage bags sat on the porch like accusations. Catherine blocked the doorway in her bathrobe, face set in that expression Sarah had learned to recognize. The look that meant decisions had been made and arguments wouldn't be entertained. This needs to end. 18 months is more than generous. Sarah's exhaustion made everything feel distant, like watching herself through gauze. I pay rent, I work, I take care of your father, what am I not doing? Ryan appeared behind Catherine, arms crossed, righteous. You have $50,000 in insurance that legally belongs to Maya, our niece. That money should benefit the whole family, not get hoarded for your own use. The absurdity might have been funny if Sarah weren't so tired. The money's frozen. Your mother's lawyer froze it. I haven't seen a cent. Lisa materialized from the kitchen, joined the tribunal. You knew what you were doing when you married Michael. Find a successful family, play the grieving widow, take everything you can. The accusation was so grotesque, Sarah almost laughed. Instead, she looked at Catherine, searched for some remnant of the woman who'd held her hand at the funeral. Is this really what you think? That I married your son for money? That I'm using Maya as leverage? Catherine's face stayed carved from stone. What I think is that you've been here long enough. Maya can stay. You need to figure out your own situation. The offer to split a mother from her daughter snapped Sarah's spine straight. She bent, lifted the nearest garbage bag, felt something tear inside her that wasn't physical. Maya comes with me. We'll be fine. She collected her daughter from the TV room where she'd been watching cartoons, oblivious to the dismantling of her life happening 2 rooms away. Walked out the door without looking back. Made it to the corner before her knees tried to buckle. Sat on the curb, started counting money. The Greyhound station smelled like diesel and desperation, fluorescent lights turning everyone's skin gray. Sarah bought 2 tickets to Bend with 3 of her last dollars, booth agent barely glancing up from her phone. The bus wouldn't leave for another hour. Sarah found a bench, pulled Maya onto her lap, tried to remember everything she knew about her grandfather's house. William Mitchell had died when Sarah was 13 back in 2009. The house sat on Old Cascade Road outside Bend, high desert country, pine forests and volcanic soil. Her mother had inherited the property but never visited, paying minimal property taxes out of habit until she died in 2010, leaving everything to Sarah in a will so simple it fit on one page. Sarah had driven out once during her sophomore year of college, curious about her family history, found the place abandoned and slightly sinister in the way of empty houses, decided it wasn't worth the cost of maintenance, and forgotten about it until tonight. She pulled up Google Maps on her dying phone, found the pin she'd saved years ago. The satellite view showed a gray roof amid thick trees, no neighboring structures visible. Property records listed it as uninhabitable, recommended for demolition. Tax bills sat unpaid for 2 years, accumulating penalties Sarah couldn't afford but would have to figure out. Maya slept against her chest, trust absolute, and Sarah felt the weight of that faith like a physical thing pressing on her sternum. The bus rumbled east through the night, climbing from Portland's river valley into the Cascade foothills. Maya slept curled in the window seat while Sarah stared at her reflection in the dark glass, trying to recognize herself. She'd been a structural engineer once, before Michael, before marriage, before grief taught her that stability was an illusion you paid monthly premiums to maintain. Bridges had made sense, steel and concrete following predictable rules, load calculations and stress analysis problems with definite solutions. People followed no such patterns. The Carter family had seemed solid, supportive. until the day they weren't. Money had seemed secure until it vanished. Sarah had believed in foundations, and now she was riding a bus toward a house that might not have walls, let alone welcome. Memory offered fragments of William Mitchell, a tall man with calloused hands who smelled like sawdust and pipe tobacco, who spoke rarely but listened carefully, who'd once shown Sarah his collection of geological surveys and topographical maps spread across a dining table. He'd been a geological engineer, worked for mining companies throughout the West during the 50s through the 80s. Sarah's mother had described him as obsessed, said he'd spent his whole life chasing gold deposits that never materialized, died poor despite decades of searching. But Sarah remembered something else. She'd been maybe 10, visiting the Ben house during a rare summer trip, found William in his study surrounded by papers. He'd looked up, smiled. "Sarah, come see something interesting." He'd shown her maps of Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, places marked with pencil notations, elevation numbers, geological formations, ore quality estimates. "Your great-great-grandfather panned for gold in these mountains back in the 1890s. Found enough to buy a farm, raise a family. I've been looking for the veins he missed, the big deposits the old-timers couldn't reach. Did you find any?" His smile had turned sad. "That's the question, isn't it? Finding gold is easy. Finding enough gold, getting it out of the ground, making it pay, that's the hard part." Then he'd said something Sarah hadn't understood until tonight. "This house has secrets, Sarah. If you ever need them, really need them, remember this. Look where the storm reveals what time hides. Don't look until you're ready. Don't look until you're desperate. Only desperate people are humble enough to see what's actually there instead of what they want to find." She thought it was a riddle, an old man's cryptic advice. Now, watching pines blur past in the darkness, Sarah wondered if desperation had finally made her ready. The Ben station was empty at 11 p.m., just a covered bench and a parking lot under sodium lights. Sarah used 15 of her last $18 to call a taxi, gave the driver an address that made him frown. "That's way out, Old Cascade Road? You sure?" "Nothing out there but woods and abandoned places." She showed him the remaining bills. "This is what I have. Can you get us there?" He looked at Maya sleeping on Sarah's shoulder, made a decision. "Yeah, okay." The drive took 25 minutes through increasingly rural darkness, streetlights giving way to tunnel vision between headlight beams, pavement degrading to gravel, gravel to dirt. The road narrowed until branches scraped the taxi's sides. Finally, the driver stopped where the track became impassable. "I can't go further. Road's washed out. You're maybe quarter-mile from whatever you're looking for." Sarah paid him everything left except $3, lifted Maya, shouldered 2 garbage bags, dragged the third. The taxi's taillights vanished, leaving them in darkness so complete Sarah's engineer brain immediately calculated the astronomical twilight moon phase, estimated visibility at less than 20 feet. She turned on her phone's flashlight, watched the battery percentage drop to 18, started walking. The house emerged from trees like something from a nightmare, listing slightly to the north, wrap-around porch sagging in the middle, windows either boarded or broken. Sarah played light across the structure, forcing herself into assessment mode instead of panic. The foundation was poured concrete, 1950s construction, showing cracks but no catastrophic failure. The framing appeared to be post and beam, solid timber that would take decades to rot through completely. The roof was metal, rusted but still covering most of the structure. Porch steps had rotted through in places, would need careful navigation. Overall structural integrity, marginal but standing, not ideal. Not safe by any code, but not immediately lethal. She tested the front door, found it locked, put her shoulder into the frame. Wood around the lock plate crumbled like wet cardboard, and the door swung inward on shrieking hinges. The smell hit her first. Mold, mouse droppings, decades of decay compressed into one olfactory assault. She swept the flashlight beam across a living room frozen in time, furniture draped in sheets gray with dust. A stone fireplace, a wood stove that looked ancient but intact, a stack of firewood against one wall that had somehow stayed dry. Maya stirred, lifted her head. "Where are we?" Sarah's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Great-Grandpa William's house. We're camping tonight. Adventure, remember?" She settled Maya on an old couch that released clouds of dust but didn't collapse, then spent 2 hours clearing enough space to be survivable. The wood stove's flue was blocked by a bird's nest but otherwise functional. The firewood was seasoned pine, left over from when William died, dry enough to burn. Sarah had never started a fire in her life, had grown up with central heating and thermostats. She tried 8 times, wasting precious matches, before finally coaxing flames from newspaper and kindling. Heat radiated out, pushed back the September chill, made the room feel marginally less like a tomb. Upstairs, she found a cedar chest full of blankets that smelled like mothballs but were intact. She shook them out, created a nest near the stove, laid Maya down wrapped in layers. Her daughter was asleep before Sarah finished tucking edges. Only then did Sarah let herself feel the full weight of where they were. Homeless, $3 to their name, no power, no running water, in a structure that might not survive its next windstorm. The fire popped, sent sparks swirling up the flue. Sarah watched embers dance and tried to remember the last time she'd felt safe. Not in the Carter house, that was certain. Maybe before Michael died, though even that memory felt suspect now, colored by everything that came after. Perhaps safety was always an illusion, a story people told themselves while standing on ground that could open up and swallow them without warning. Dawn came gray and cold. Sarah woke stiff, every muscle complaining about the wood floor beneath her. Maya still slept, face peaceful, trusting. Sarah stood carefully, moved to the windows, assessed her situation in daylight. The house looked worse than midnight had suggested. Exterior walls showing rot in the corners. Foundation plants grown wild enough to be small trees. The yard a jungle of weeds and volunteer saplings. But the bones were good. Sarah could see it in the way the structure held its shape, the quality of the timber framing visible through holes in the siding. Someone had built this house to last, using materials and methods from an era when construction meant something beyond minimum code compliance. She explored systematically, cataloging problems and solutions. The well pump outside was hand-cranked, handle broken, but potentially fixable. The bathroom had a composting toilet long since composted to nothing, would need replacement or a bucket system. The kitchen showed evidence of mice, but no structural damage. The pantry held shelves of canned goods, most rusted or swollen with botulism, though 4 cans of beans looked intact. Dates stamped 1995 but sealed properly, no bulging or leakage. 4 cans meant 2 days of food if they stretched it. After that, Sarah would need solutions she didn't have yet. Maya woke asking for breakfast. Sarah opened a can of beans, heated it over the wood stove in a pan she'd scrubbed with well water, served it on paper plates from a package that had survived decades. They ate sitting onto the porch steps in weak sunlight, Maya chattering about the adventure, Sarah calculating how to transform survival into something resembling life. The walk into town took 90 minutes, Sarah carrying Maya for the last half when small legs gave out. Ben's Main Street felt like stepping back in time. Local businesses and family restaurants, a hardware store with hand-lettered signs, a diner called Frank's that smelled like coffee and bacon grease. Sarah pushed through the door, Maya on her hip, approached the counter where a man with gray hair and a stained apron was pouring coffee. "Help you?" "I need to buy some parts. Hand pump repair kit if you have it." "For what kind of pump?" "Old well pump, 1950s, maybe 1960s, out on Old Cascade Road." The man's eyebrows lifted. "Old Cascade? That's nothing but abandoned properties out there. You staying somewhere?" "The Mitchell place. William Mitchell's old house." A voice spoke from behind her, male, aged, surprised. "William Mitchell? You're talking about the geologist?" Sarah turned. An older man sat in a booth, somewhere past 70, wearing work clothes and carpenter's hands. His face showed weathering from decades outdoors, his eyes sharp and assessing. "You knew him?" "Knew him. I lived down the road from him for 40 years. Walt Morrison. I did some carpentry work for William back in the 70s and 80s. Haven't heard that name in years." He paused, studied Sarah's face. "You're not—" "His granddaughter, Sarah Mitchell. My mother was Linda." Walt stood slowly, moved closer like he was seeing a ghost. "Linda's girl? Good Lord. I remember when you were small, visiting summers. You'd have been what, 10, 12? 10. Last time I was here, he showed me his maps, geological surveys. He was obsessed with those, always looking for the next deposit, the next claim. Never stopped believing he'd find something big. Walt's eyes moved to Maya, then back to Sarah. What brings you out here? That house has been empty since William died in '09. Sarah felt the careful walls she'd built threatening to crack. She kept her voice level. I needed a place to stay. The house is mine. I inherited it when my mother passed. Walt's expression shifted, understanding filling in details Sarah hadn't spoken. You're living there? With a child? That place isn't safe. No power, no water. Structure's been neglected for 15 years. It has a roof, 4 walls. That's more than I had yesterday. The statement hung in the air, containing volumes. Walt looked at Sarah for a long moment, reading the exhaustion, the pride, the desperation being held together by pure will. The well pump is fixable. I can do it. No charge. William helped me out of a jam back in '82, never let me pay him back. Figure I still owe him. Sarah's throat tightened. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. I'll come by tomorrow. Bring tools. Get that pump working. Meanwhile, you need work? He gestured to the man behind the counter. Frank, you still looking for breakfast shift help? Frank, the diner owner, assessed Sarah with a practiced eye. You have waitressing experience? 18 months, 2 different places in Portland. Can you start Monday? 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., 5 days a week, 11 an hour plus tips. Tips are decent. Breakfast crowd likes to take care of servers. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. The next 3 weeks blurred together in exhaustion and incremental progress. Walt appeared the day after their meeting, spent 3 hours fixing the well pump, left behind a box of canned goods and a space heater for Maya's room that ran off a car battery and inverter. True to his word, he refused payment, said he'd be back to help with other repairs, told Sarah to call if she needed anything. Frank's diner became Sarah's anchor. 7-hour shifts that left her feet swollen, but brought home $200 to $300 weekly between wages and tips. She paid $50 monthly toward the property tax debt, kept the rest for food, saved $20 a week in the old jewelry box, building toward emergencies she knew would come. Maya started at Bend Elementary, caught the school bus at the end of their dirt road each morning, came home with stories about new friends and art projects. Sarah avoided explaining why they lived in a house with 1 working room, why they used a bucket for a bathroom, why dinner was often beans and rice. Children adapted better than adults to circumstances that had no good explanation. Maya asked occasionally about Grandma Catherine, and Sarah answered carefully that sometimes adults made decisions that were hard to understand, that family was complicated, that love didn't always look like you expected. Maya seemed to accept this, moved on to questions about whether they could get a kitten, when they'd have a TV again, if Mom could make chocolate chip cookies like she used to. Walt became a regular presence, showing up weekends with materials and expertise. He patched the roof, replaced rotted porch boards, installed proper wiring for lights in the main rooms, taught Sarah basic carpentry while they worked side by side. He never asked why she'd come to Ben, never commented on their circumstances beyond practical observations about what needed fixing. His wife Barbara brought over casseroles, hand-me-down clothes for Maya, a bag of books and toys her grandchildren had outgrown. The help felt genuine, unsentimental, the kind of assistance people offered when they'd been poor themselves and remembered. One afternoon while replacing window frames, Sarah mentioned finding William's old notebooks in the study. Walt's hands stilled on his hammer, and something crossed his face, too quick to read. William kept a lot of notes, geological surveys, mining reports, never threw anything away. Did you know about his mining interests? Rocky Mountain Mineral Consortium? Walt resumed hammering, but his rhythm was different, slightly off. That was before my time. I think it was 60s, maybe 70s. He didn't talk about it much, said it was a failed venture, best forgotten. But he kept the records, maps, surveys, correspondence. William kept everything. Couldn't tell you why. Man lived poor but saved every piece of paper he ever touched. The subject closed, Walt shifting conversation to roof pitch and water runoff, and Sarah let it drop. Whatever William's mining interests had been, they'd clearly ended in disappointment. The house and property stood as testament to a life of modest means, hard work, dreams that went unfulfilled. By November, Sarah and Maya had settled into routine that felt almost sustainable. The house was warm, dry, safe enough for winter. Sarah's savings had reached $800. Maya's teacher sent home notes saying she was thriving, making friends, reading above grade level. Sarah felt like someone drowning who'd found a rock to cling to, not rescued, but surviving. And survival was its own kind of victory. The Carter family existed as closed chapter, doors sealed, not forgotten, but filed away in the place where painful things went to lose their sharp edges. Then the weather changed. November brought rain that hammered the metal roof like percussion, wind that tested every seam and joint, temperatures that dropped into the 20s at night. Walt called on the 15th, voice serious. Sarah, Weather Service is predicting a major storm system moving in. Arctic front mixing with Pacific moisture. Heavy rain, high winds, possible flooding. You should think about coming into town, staying with Barbara and me until it passes. Sarah looked around the house they'd worked so hard to make livable. We'll be okay. You fix the roof, the walls are solid. We have firewood and food. Sarah, Walt's voice held a weight she hadn't heard before. I've lived here 45 years. I know these storms. They're not like Portland weather, out where you are, no neighbors, no quick help if something goes wrong. William's house is old. It's held up so far, but a storm like they're predicting. I appreciate the concern, but we're staying. I promise we'll be careful. Walt sighed, resigned. All right, but you have my number. Anything happens, anything at all, you call. I don't care if it's 3 in the morning. The storm arrived November 19th at dusk, announcing itself with wind that bent the pines horizontal and rain that turned the world gray. Sarah fed Maya an early dinner, built up the fire in the wood stove, laid out flashlights and blankets. By 9 p.m., the wind was screaming, finding every gap in the structure, making the whole house creak and groan. Trees cracked outside with sounds like rifle shots. Rain drummed the roof so hard Sarah had to shout for Maya to hear her. They huddled together in the living room, Sarah reading aloud from a library book, pretending this was an adventure and not a test of whether the house would hold. Maya fell asleep around 10, exhausted by fear and eventual boredom. Sarah sat watching shadows cast by the wood stove, listening to the storm tear at their shelter, willing the walls to stand, the roof to hold, the foundation to remain true. At 11:47, something exploded in the basement. Not wind, not falling debris, but a deep structural boom that vibrated through the floor beneath them. Sarah's engineer instincts screamed foundation failure, load-bearing wall collapse, critical systems compromised. She grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight Walt had brought over, told Maya to stay near the fire, descended the basement stairs with hands shaking. The beam cut through darkness thick enough to feel solid, revealed stone walls sweating moisture, dirt floor uneven and strange. The old metal shelving unit had fallen, spilled its contents across the ground. Paint cans, rusted tools, rotted cardboard boxes scattered like shrapnel. But beyond the mess, in the east corner where Sarah's light wavered, something was different. Wrong. Changed. A section of brick wall, maybe 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall, had separated from the structure around it. Not collapsed, not damaged, but revealed, as if something behind it had pushed through or the mortar holding it had finally surrendered to time and pressure. Through the bomb, Sarah's flashlight caught emptiness, a void where solid wall should be, and her heart kicked against her ribs hard enough to hurt. She moved closer, careful on the uneven floor, aware she was alone in a basement during a storm doing something probably stupid. The bricks came away easily when she pulled them, mortar turned to dust, revealing more darkness behind. Within 10 minutes, she'd created an opening large enough to fit through, and her light showed what time had hidden. A room, 6 by 8 feet, concrete lined, sealed against moisture, and in the center, a safe. Old industrial Mosler brand, 3 feet tall, covered in dust so thick it looked like gray fur. Sarah's hands trembled as she climbed through the gap. The hidden room smelled different from the basement, drier, sealed, like opening a time capsule. She approached the safe, tried the handle without expecting anything, and nearly fell when it turned smoothly. The door swung open on hinges that barely squeaked, revealing contents that made no immediate sense. Stacks of paper bound with rubber bands that disintegrated at her touch, leather pouches that clinked when moved, a thick ledger with cracked leather binding, and a sealed envelope with handwriting across the front. To my heir. Sarah didn't take anything. Not yet. She photographed everything with her phone's camera, 15% battery and dropping, then carefully removed one leather pouch, one stack of papers, the ledger, the envelope, climbed back through the gap, climbed the basement stairs on legs that didn't feel quite solid. Maya still slept near the fire, peaceful and trusting. The storm still raged outside, wind and rain trying to tear the house apart. Sarah set her discoveries on the kitchen table, sat in William's chair, and opened the leather pouch. Gold coins spilled across the wood, heavy and real and impossible. Dates stamped 1890s through 1920s, faces and eagles and denominations that meant nothing to Sarah's engineer brain except value, except currency, except her grandfather had hidden actual gold in his basement and never told anyone. The papers were stock certificates, ornate and official, Rocky Mountain Mineral Consortium, Inc., Class A common stock, certified to William Mitchell. Various dates between 1947 and 1963, quantities ranging from 5,000 to 15,000 shares per certificate. Sarah counted, recounted, arrived at a total that made her vision swim, 85,000 shares. In a company she'd never heard of, from an era before she was born, probably worthless now, but her grandfather had hidden them behind a brick wall for a reason. The ledger opened to pages of careful handwriting, financial records spanning 1947 to 1982, investment amounts, dividend income, reinvestment purchases, all documented with the precision of someone who understood accounting. The final entry stopped Sarah's breath. Total shares, 85,000. Estimated value of company still operating, $2.3 million. Do not tell family yet. Wait for the right time. Sarah's phone battery was dying. She searched Rocky Mountain Mineral Consortium with shaking fingers, found no direct results, but a Wikipedia entry for Summit Mining Holdings mentioned the name in passing. Summit Mining Holdings was formed in 2015 from the restructuring of Continental Resources LLC, which itself was created from the 1989 merger of RMS Mining Corp. And Copper Valley Resources. RMS Mining Corp. was formed in 1968 from the merger of Rocky Mountain Mineral Consortium and Silver Peak Mining. The company still existed, changed names, merged, restructured, but continuous operation across 77 years. Sarah searched Summit Mining Holdings valuation, found an article from Forbes dated 3 months prior, estimating the private company's worth at $740 million. Her phone died before she could process the implications. Sarah sat in darkness, lit only by the wood stove, gold coins gleaming on the table, stock certificates that might represent a fortune or nothing at all, her dead grandfather's handwriting promising wealth that couldn't possibly be real. Outside, the storm that had revealed what time hid continued its assault, but Sarah barely heard it anymore. The sealed envelope sat unopened in front of her, her name written in letters that had waited 15 years to be read. And somewhere in her chest, something that felt like hope was trying to unfold itself despite every lesson experience had taught her about trusting and rescue. Sarah sat motionless until the fire burned down to embers and first light crept through gaps in the curtains. The envelope remained sealed, William's handwriting across the front, patient as the dead. Her fingers traced the letters of her own name, feeling the indent where his pen had pressed into paper decades before she'd needed whatever message lay inside. The storm had passed, leaving silence so complete Sarah could hear Maya's breathing from across the room, the tick of cooling metal in the stove, her own heartbeat loud in her ears. She opened the envelope with the care of someone defusing a bomb. The letter inside was dated March 1995, written in the same steady hand as the ledger entries. To whoever finds this, if you're reading these words, I'm gone, and you found what I hid. I built that wall in 1975 after the lawsuit nearly destroyed me. After I learned that visible wealth makes you a target for everyone who thinks they deserve a piece of what you built. My brother tried to claim I owed him half of everything because family shares, because blood, because he needed it more than I did. The courts disagreed, but lawyers don't work for free, and by the time I'd defended what was mine, I'd spent $200,000 proving my right to keep it. So I hid what remained, not from paranoia, but from experience. I didn't tell your grandmother Margaret before she died in '72. Didn't tell your mother Linda when she inherited this house. The company was Rocky Mountain Mineral Consortium, 4 engineers with $12,000 in a dream back in '47. We found gold in Montana, real deposits, the kind that make men rich or dead depending on their luck. I kept my shares through good times and bad, through offers to buy me out, through mergers and name changes, and all the ways companies evolve while trying to stay alive. If you found this, you were desperate enough to search. That means you need it, and people who need are humble enough to use wealth wisely instead of letting it use them. The shares might be worthless now, the company long dead, but if they're not, if by some miracle the consortium survived, don't let money change who you are. It reveals character, doesn't create it. Use what you find to build something that matters. William Mitchell. Sarah read it 3 times, memorizing words that felt like permission and warning braided together. Dawn strengthened outside, turned the windows from black to gray, and she finally stood, her body stiff from sitting frozen through the night. Maya would wake soon, need breakfast and normalcy, the routine that made childhood bearable even when the adults were quietly falling apart. Sarah returned the documents to the safe, photographed everything again with Walt's old digital camera he'd lent her for taking pictures of repair progress, then sealed the hidden room as best she could, replacing bricks to hide the gap. Upstairs, she splashed well water on her face, changed into her diner uniform, woke Maya gently. They ate oatmeal cooked on the wood stove while Sarah's mind spun through possibilities and impossibilities in equal measure. The gold coins alone were worth something. Maybe 5,000, maybe more. She had no expertise in numismatics, but gold had value beyond its form. The stock certificates were the real question, the variable that could mean nothing or everything, and Sarah needed someone who understood corporate law, securities, the arcane rules governing how companies transformed across decades without killing the equity that funded them. She knew one lawyer. Dr. Rebecca Morrison had handled Michael's estate pro bono, recognizing Sarah's financial situation, doing the work out of decency rather than expectation of payment. Rebecca practiced family law primarily, wills and divorces and custody battles, but she'd know who to call, how to navigate towards someone with the right expertise. Sarah dropped Maya at school, drove Walt's borrowed truck into Bend, found a coffee shop with Wi-Fi, and composed an email that took 40 minutes to write. Dr. Morrison, this is Sarah Mitchell. You helped me with my husband's estate in 2023. I apologize for contacting you out of nowhere, but I need advice about some documents I found in my grandfather's house. Stock certificates from 1947, very old. I don't know if they have any value, but I need an expert opinion. I can send photographs if that would help. I don't have money for legal fees right now, but if the certificates are worth anything, I can pay from that. Please let me know if you can help or who I should contact. Sarah. The response came within 2 hours. Sarah, good to hear from you, though. I'm sorry, circumstances sound difficult. Send me the photographs. I'll show them to a colleague who specializes in corporate securities. He'll be able to tell us if this is worth pursuing. No charge for initial consultation. Rebecca. Sarah sent 20 images, high resolution, clear shots of certificates and ledger pages in William's letter. Then she went to work, served coffee and pancakes and eggs over easy, smiled at regulars who tipped well, moved through her shift on autopilot while her phone sat heavy in her pocket, waiting for a response that would either confirm her middle-of-the-night calculations or reveal them as exhausted fantasy. Rebecca called during Sarah's break, her voice carrying an excitement that professional restraint couldn't quite contain. Sarah, I showed the photos to James Bradford. He's a securities attorney who handles complex corporate cases. He says if these certificates are authentic, this could be extremely valuable. Summit Mining Holdings, the company your grandfather invested in, it still exists as a major private mining operation. James wants to meet with you as soon as possible. Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. How valuable are we talking? Hundreds? Thousands? Rebecca paused, choosing words carefully. James doesn't want to speculate until he's examined the physical documents and done research into the company's merger history. But Sarah, if the shares converted properly through all the corporate changes, We're potentially talking about millions, maybe tens of millions. The break room tilted slightly. Sarah sat down hard on a plastic chair. That's not possible. My grandfather lived poor, died poor. If the shares were worth anything, he would have sold them. Not necessarily. James says it's common for old shareholders to lose track of their holdings, especially through mergers and restructurings. And your grandfather's letter suggests he hid them deliberately. James can drive to Bend this weekend if that works for you. Saturday morning brought James Bradford to the farmhouse. A man in his mid-40s with sharp eyes and the kind of calm that came from handling high-stakes negotiations regularly. He wore jeans and a casual jacket, making himself unremarkable, and spent 3 hours examining documents with a jeweler's loupe and reference materials he'd brought in a leather briefcase. Sarah made coffee, answered questions about William's death and her inheritance of the property, explained her circumstances without going into detail about the Carter family. Maya played outside, chasing chickens Walt had brought over last week, oblivious to the examination happening at the kitchen table that might transform their lives into something unrecognizable. Finally, James set down his loupe and pulled out a laptop, began typing notes and running calculations on a spreadsheet that filled with numbers Sarah couldn't quite process from her angle. Everything looks authentic. The paper stock is correct for the era. The printing method matches standards from the 40s through 60s. William's signatures are consistent across all documents. Now the complicated part is tracking what happened to these shares through multiple corporate transformations. He pulled up files, showed Sarah merger documents and corporate filings he'd researched. 1947, Rocky Mountain Mineral Consortium Incorporated, 4 founding partners. Your grandfather held 85,000 shares, substantial ownership. 1968, first major merger with Silver Peak Mining, created RMS Mining Corporation. Terms were 1.2 shares of RMS for each share of RMMC. So Williams' 85,000 became 102,000. The numbers felt abstract, disconnected from reality. 1989, second merger. RMS combined with Copper Valley Resources to form Continental Resources LLC. Conversion rate was 0.85, so 102,000 became 86,700. Then 2015, Continental restructured into Summit Mining Holdings private company, conversion rate 1.5. Final count is 130,050 shares. Sarah's engineering background made her good with math, but these calculations existed in a realm beyond her experience. What does that mean in actual value? James pulled up a financial report, pointed to a valuation estimate. Summit Mining Holdings is privately held, no public stock price, but recent appraisals for financing purposes put the company's value at $740 million. They have approximately 515,000 total shares outstanding, based on the documents I found. Your 130,000 shares represent 25.2% ownership. He typed the calculation, turned the laptop so Sarah could see the result. 25.2% of $740 million is $186.5 million. The kitchen went quiet except for chickens clucking outside and Maya's laughter. Sarah stared at the number on the screen, a figure so large it stopped having meaning, became abstract like the distance to the moon expressed in inches. That can't be right. There has to be a mistake. James's expression stayed neutral, professional. There are several complicating factors. The 2015 restructuring required shareholders to re-register within 180 days, or their shares would be considered abandoned and revert to the company. Your grandfather died in 2009, so he couldn't re-register. The question is whether Montana law allows the company to claim abandonment without proper notification to the shareholder's address of record. And if they can, then the shares are worthless, already claimed by the company. But if they failed to properly notify, if they violated corporate law or their own bylaws, then your inheritance stands and Summit Mining has to recognize your ownership. That's what I'll need to determine through research and then negotiation or litigation. Sarah's hands felt cold despite the warmth from the wood stove. I can't afford a lawyer for something this complicated. I have $800 saved. I work on contingency for cases like this. 25% of whatever we recover. If we get nothing, you pay nothing except filing fees and funds. which I confront and deduct from any settlement. If we recover 100 million, I take 25 million and you keep 75. The math made sense even as the numbers remained unreal. And if Summit Mining refuses to recognize the shares, then we sue. Discovery, depositions, potentially trial. Could take 2 years, cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees on their side. Considerable expense for us. Most companies prefer to settle rather than fight, especially when the law isn't clearly in their favor. But I need you to understand this is a gamble. We might win big or we might win nothing. Sarah looked out the window at Maya, 5 years old, unaware her life might be about to change beyond recognition or stay exactly the same. My daughter deserves security, stability. If there's any chance these shares are legitimate, I have to try. Then I'll draft a letter to Summit Mining Holdings, notify them of your claim, request verification of the share history. We'll see how they respond. The letter went out certified mail 3 days later, formal and precise, outlining Sarah Mitchell's inheritance, providing certificate numbers in Williams' shareholder identification, requesting confirmation of current ownership status. James had walked Sarah through every paragraph, explaining the legal language, the strategic phrasing designed to establish her claim while leaving room for negotiation. Now came waiting, days stretching into weeks, while Sarah maintained the routine that kept them fed and housed. She told no one about the discovery. Walt continued helping with repairs, asking occasionally how Sarah was settling in, if she needed anything, offering advice about winterizing the house for serious cold. His presence felt reassuring, grandfatherly, though Sarah noticed he changed the subject whenever William's name came up in the context of mining or finances. Whatever history existed there, Walt clearly considered it closed, and Sarah didn't push. Maya's teacher sent home progress reports showing excellent work in reading and math, requested a parent conference that Sarah attended during her lunch break, heard nothing but praise for her daughter's adjustment in academic performance. The days accumulated into 3 weeks before James called. Summit Mining responded, "It's not good." Sarah sat down, phone pressed to her ear. They reject the claim? Completely. Their legal department says they have no record of William Mitchell as a current shareholder, that the 2015 restructuring required re-registration, that no response was received, and therefore the shares reverted to the company per Montana corporate law and their bylaws. They consider the matter closed. But they didn't notify him. He was dead. They claim they sent notices to all registered addresses. But here's the interesting part. They offered to borrow the physical certificates from you for $5,000 as historical collectibles. That's an insult offer, and it tells me they're worried. If they genuinely believed the shares were worthless, they wouldn't bother making any offer at all. Sarah's anger felt clean and sharp, cutting through confusion. So what do? We push back. I'm hiring a researcher to dig into their 2015 restructuring, find out exactly who received notices, whether they followed proper legal procedure. Montana law requires companies to make reasonable efforts to notify all shareholders of major corporate actions. If they only notified active traders and ignored dormant accounts, they violated their fiduciary duty. 2 weeks of research produced results that turned James's professional calm into something approaching enthusiasm. He drove to Bend again, spread documents across Sarah's kitchen table like evidence at a trial. They sent re-registration notices to 247 shareholders in 2015. But Summit Mining had 312 registered shareholders according to their own corporate records from 2014. 65 accounts received no notice. Your grandfather was one of them. Sarah studied the list, saw the gaps. Why wouldn't they notify everyone? Because the 65 unnotified accounts were all dormant, no trading activity in over 5 years. Summit's management team had been trying to consolidate ownership, simplify their structure before a planned expansion. By claiming abandonment on inactive accounts, they could acquire those shares for themselves at drastically reduced prices. Look at this. He showed her another document, internal company records obtained through public filing requirements. After the restructuring, Summit's CEO and 3 executives purchased the abandoned shares at $10 per share. Market value at the time was approximately $1,200 per share. They bought 120,000 shares for $1.2 million when fair value was $144 million. Essentially, they stole $143 million from shareholders they deliberately failed to notify. The numbers were too large, too brazen. Sarah's engineer mind rejected the premise as physically impossible, though the evidence sat in front of her confirming what should not be real. How is that legal? It's not. It's fraud, securities fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, possibly criminal. But proving it requires documentation, and they're not going to hand that over willingly. I'm drafting a second letter, much more aggressive. We'll threaten litigation, cite the notification failures, mention the other 64 shareholders they cheated. Let them know we're serious and informed. The second letter went out in December, 3 months after Sarah had found the hidden room. Winter had settled over Central Oregon, brought snow that turned the farmhouse into a postcard while making Sarah's commute to the diner treacherous. She'd saved another $600, paid down the property tax debt, bought Maya winter clothes from the thrift store. Life had achieved a fragile equilibrium between survival and stability, and the possibility of wealth felt increasingly unreal, a story she'd told herself during one desperate night that daylight should have dissolved. Then James called, voice tight with something between satisfaction and concern. Summit Mining's CEO contacted me directly. David Thornton, he wants to talk settlement. Sarah's pulse kicked. That was fast. Because they're panicking. I did more research, found 41 of the other 65 families who were never notified. Some of the original shareholders died, but their heirs exist, and they have the same claim you do. If this becomes a class action lawsuit, Summit Mining is looking at $300 million in legitimate claims plus punitive damages. Thornton wants to make a deal before this explodes into something that destroys the company. What kind of deal? He's proposing an internal audit, 4 weeks, hire PricewaterhouseCoopers to verify your share history and current valuation. If the audit confirms your claim is legitimate, they'll make a buyout offer. He emphasized they want to avoid litigation, keep this quiet, resolve it fairly. Sarah heard the skepticism in James's voice. You don't trust him. I trust the audit, assuming it's truly independent. But Thornton runs a company that deliberately cheated shareholders. His definition of fair might differ from ours. Still, it's progress. Let's agree to the audit, see what they find, negotiate from there. The audit consumed January, faceless accountants from PricewaterhouseCoopers requesting documents, interviewing Sarah, examining Williams' certificates under laboratory conditions. James handled most of the communication, shielding Sarah from the process while keeping her informed of progress. Week 1 verified the certificates were genuine, paper and ink matched the era, printing methods consistent with 1940s standards. Week 2 confirmed Williams' shareholder account in Summit's archived records, found evidence he'd been sent dividend checks through the 1980s that stopped when he presumably lost interest or forgot about the holdings. Week 3 tracked the merger conversions, verified James's calculations, confirmed the 130,050 shares as accurate. Week 4 produced the valuations Sarah had been simultaneously dreading and hoping for. James delivered the results in person on a Friday afternoon, his expression carefully neutral. PricewaterhouseCoopers confirmed everything. You own 25.2% of Summit Mining Holdings. Current company valuation $740 million. Your shares are worth $186.5 million. Sarah stood at the kitchen counter, hands braced against the edge, breathing deliberately. You're telling me my grandfather died believing he had maybe 2 or 3 million in a mining company that might not survive, and actually had 186 million. Not exactly. In 1995, when he wrote that letter, the company was worth much less. The value increased dramatically over the past 30 years as Summit expanded operations, acquired new claims, benefited from rising commodity prices. William couldn't have known what it would become. But he knew enough to hide it. He knew people would fight over it, that visible wealth attracts predators. He was right. Sarah thought about Catherine Carter, about Ryan and Lisa, about how quickly family became enemies when money entered the equation. William's caution no longer seemed paranoid but prescient. What happens now? Thornton wants to meet, discuss buyout terms. You could hold the shares, become a 25% owner, join the board, collect dividends, Or you could sell, take cash, walk away. Most people in your position choose cash. Less complicated, immediate, no ongoing obligations. How much would they offer? James pulled out his laptop, showed her financial projections. Fair market value is $186 million, but you're a single mother with no resources to fight a long legal battle, and they know it. First offer will probably be low, maybe $120 million, trying to lowball you into accepting less than you deserve. We counter at 160, settle around 140 to 155. The numbers had stopped having meaning weeks ago. 120 million was as incomprehensible as 186, both representing amounts of money Sarah's brain couldn't convert into actual purchasing power or lifestyle implications. What would you recommend? Honestly, take the cash. You want stability for your daughter, a chance to rebuild your life. Shares in a mining company tie you to volatile commodity markets, board politics, management decisions you can't control. Cash gives you freedom. Sarah looked around the farmhouse, thought about the work she and Walt had done to make it livable, the life they'd built from nothing. Security mattered more than maximum return, certainty more than potential. Okay, let's meet with Thornton. The conference call happened via video, James and Sarah on one end in his Portland office, David Thornton and Summit Mining's legal team on the other. Thornton was 60, silver-haired, projecting authority and controlled concern. He opened with acknowledgement that Sarah's claim was legitimate, that Summit took its obligations to shareholders seriously, that they wanted to resolve this amicably. Ms. Mitchell, your grandfather was one of our founding members. We have tremendous respect for his contributions, and we want to honor his legacy. At the same time, our company has operated for 77 years, created hundreds of buys, generated billions in economic value. Sudden ownership claims from the past create instability that hurts everyone. James's expression stayed neutral. Mr. Thornton, the law is clear. Ms. Mitchell owns 25.2% of your company. You can recognize that fact willingly or through litigation, but the outcome is the same. I understand. That's why we'd like to make a buyout offer, $120 million cash, transferred within 30 days of signing. In exchange, Ms. Mitchell releases all claims, signs a non-disclosure agreement, and we avoid the publicity and expense of a lawsuit. Sarah felt the number land without impact, too large to register emotionally. James leaned forward slightly. Your own audit values Ms. Mitchell's shares at $186 million. Why would she accept $66 million less? Thornton's expression hardened slightly. Because litigation could take 5 years. Legal fees would run into millions. There's no guarantee of victory despite what you think the law says. $120 million is immediate, certain, life-changing money. James didn't blink. Counteroffer, $155 million, conditional on Summit proactively contacting the 41 other families who weren't notified in 2015, offering fair settlements. You resolve the entire problem, avoid class action exposure, clean up your shareholder records properly. Thornton conferred quietly with his legal team, voices muted. 2 minutes passed before he unmuted. That's significantly higher than we hoped, but your point about the other shareholders is valid. If Ms. Mitchell agrees to help us identify those families and encourages them to settle rather than sue, we can accept $155 million. Contingent on signing within 14 days, non-disclosure agreement, mutual release of all claims. Sarah's voice came out steadier than she felt. I need to think about this. It's not a decision I can make in the moment. Of course, take the weekend. But Ms. Mitchell, understand that this offer expires Monday. After that, we're prepared to fight in court for as long as it takes. The call ended. James closed his laptop, looked at Sarah with an expression mixing professional satisfaction and genuine concern. This is a good offer, not perfect but good. You'd net approximately $61 million after taxes and my fee. That's generational wealth, security for Maya's entire life, resources to do anything you want. Sarah watched traffic move through downtown Portland, people living normal lives where 6-figure problems were catastrophic and 8-figure solutions were fantasies. What about the other families? The ones Summit cheated? If you accept, Thornton will be motivated to settle with them quickly and fairly. Your agreement puts pressure on him to clean up the entire mess. If you refuse and force litigation, he might fight everyone, drag it out for years. So I helped the other victims by giving up $30 million of what's legally mine. James's silence was answer enough. Sarah stood, moved to the window, imagined Maya's future laid out in possibilities that money could purchase or protect against. College without debt, healthcare without compromise, housing that didn't require duct tape and prayers, the ability to help others the way no one had helped them when Catherine Carter put their belongings in garbage bags. I'll take the deal, $155 million, but I want it in writing that Summit contacts those other families within 90 days and makes legitimate offers. I'll add that to the settlement terms. The paperwork arrived Tuesday, 60 pages of legal language that James walked Sarah through line by line. Release of claims, non-disclosure provisions, payment schedule, tax implications, verification of account information for wire transfer. She signed with a pen that felt too light for the weight of the commitment, initialed every page, watched her life change with strokes of ink across paper that would be filed away in archives and forgotten while the money it represented transformed everything. 60 days later, on a Thursday morning in late March, Sarah received an email from her bank with a subject line flagged for security review. She opened it standing in the farmhouse kitchen, coffee growing cold in her hand, and read the balance notification 3 times before her brain accepted the reality. $155 million had arrived in her checking account overnight, transforming numbers on a screen into actual purchasing power. The taxes took $57 million, federal and state combining to claim their share of wealth that had existed hidden for decades. James's contingency fee absorbed another $20 million, earned through months of research and negotiation. Legal costs and accounting fees took $400,000 more. The final transfer to Sarah's new investment account, managed by advisors Rebecca Morrison had recommended, totaled $61.3 million. And even after all the deductions, even after understanding that 40% of theoretical wealth had evaporated into government coffers and professional fees, the number remained absurd. Sarah sat at the kitchen table where William's letter had promised this possibility, where stock certificates had revealed what time had hidden, and tried to feel something proportional to what had happened. Relief seemed inadequate. Joy felt wrong when the money came from her grandfather's fear of his own family. Gratitude mixed with grief for a man who died never knowing his careful hiding had worked, never learning his granddaughter would be the desperate person humble enough to find it. Maya came home from school, showed Sarah a drawing of their house with chickens in the yard and smoke from the chimney, asked if they could get a butt now that they had a real home. Sarah said maybe, thinking about how to explain to a 5-year-old that they had enough money to buy 1,000 bongs, trying to find language for wealth that wouldn't corrupt the childhood she was working so hard to preserve as normal. Walt stopped by that evening with materials for replacing the last broken windows, found Sarah distracted and distant. He asked if everything was okay, and Sarah almost told him, almost let the secret out. But William's letter echoed in her mind about how money changed people, revealed character, made targets of those who possessed it. Instead, she said she'd had a long day, thanked him for his help, promised to assist with the windows Saturday morning like always. Life continued in its established patterns even as the foundation had shifted beneath it. Sarah still worked at the diner, serving breakfast to regulars who had no idea the waitress refilling their coffee could buy the building outright. She still shopped carefully, still drove Walt's borrowed truck, still heated the house with the wood stove, even though she could afford to install central heating or buy a new house entirely. Some of it was caution, not wanting to draw attention until she understood how to navigate wealth without becoming a spectacle. But more of it was honesty, Sarah testing herself against William's warning, seeing if money would change who she was or simply reveal character that had always existed beneath circumstances. The call came Friday afternoon, Catherine Carter's voice on the line after 6 months of silence, and Sarah knew before the first word finished that the news had reached Portland somehow, that privacy was already compromised. Sarah, I saw an article online about you and Summit Mining Holdings, a settlement for over $100 million. Sarah's hand tightened on the phone, knuckles white. Where did you see that? Business Journal. They didn't name you, but they mentioned a granddaughter of William Mitchell, and I know you inherited his house in the numbers. Tara, they're saying $155 million. I signed a non-disclosure agreement. I can't discuss the settlement. Catherine's tone shifted, became the voice she'd used when Sarah first moved into the Carter house, warm and concerned and completely artificial. I'm calling because we need to talk about Maya. Michael's will specified that unexpected inheritances should be held in trust for her benefit. As her grandmother, I have legal standing to request oversight of those funds. The threat was clear, wrapped in concern for a child Catherine had shown no interest in for half a year. Sarah kept her voice level through sheer will. Michael's will addressed inheritances from the Carter family. This money came from my family. It has nothing to do with Michael's estate. A judge might interpret it differently. I'm not trying to be difficult, Sarah. I just want to make sure Maya's interests are protected. The word protected landed like a slap, coming from the woman who'd put a 5-year-old's belongings in a trash bag. Sarah's anger felt cold and precise, a scalpel rather than a hammer. You want to protect Maya now? After throwing us out? After not calling once in 6 months to check if your granddaughter was safe or fed or warm? You don't get to claim concern when money appears, Catherine. That's not protection. That's predation. I made mistakes. I admit that. But this isn't about us. It's about Maya, and you can't deny her the security this money represents. Sarah ended the call without responding, hands shaking, fury and fear mixing into something that tasted like bile. She contacted Rebecca immediately, explained the situation, asked what legal standing Catherine actually had. Rebecca promised to research Montana law, Michael's will language, case precedent for grandparents claiming rights to inheritance. 24 hours later, she called back with news that was both reassuring and concerning. Catherine has minimal legal standing. Michael's will does mention inheritances, but the clause specifically says Carter family estate. A good lawyer could argue he meant all inheritances, but it's a weak argument. However, family court judges are unpredictable when it comes to children's welfare. Catherine could file suit, drag you through months of hearings, create publicity and stress, even if she ultimately loses. So I'm supposed to just pay her off to go away? Rebecca's sigh carried years of experience with family law's ugly realities. You could offer a settlement, set up an education trust for Maya, substantial amount, independent trustee, so Catherine can't access it directly. Enough to make her feel like she won something. Structured so it actually benefits Maya. Most people take the money and drop the fight. Sarah hated every word but couldn't argue with the logic. Fighting on principle cost time and emotional energy she didn't want to spend, and Maya deserved better than watching her mother battle her grandmother in court. She authorized Rebecca to draft a settlement offer. $8 million in an irrevocable trust for Maya's education and future needs. Managed by a bank rather than family, with Catherine receiving $200,000 as a one-time payment to compensate for the inconvenience of not controlling her granddaughter's wealth. Catherine accepted within 48 hours, signed releases that forbid further claims against Sarah's inheritance. They met once to finalize the paperwork at Rebecca's office with lawyers present to prevent the meeting from devolving into accusations and counter-accusations. Sarah watched Catherine sign documents that bought her silence and wondered if William had dealt with similar calculations, if his brother's betrayal had felt this transactional, this necessary and poisonous simultaneously. Catherine tried to speak as they prepared to leave, her voice carrying something that might have been genuine regret beneath layers of self-justification. I'm sorry for how things ended. I was overwhelmed after Michael died, and having you there reminded me every day of what I'd lost, and I handled it badly. Sarah met her eyes, seeing a woman who'd chosen cruelty when strength was needed, who'd thrown away relationship for the temporary relief of not facing grief. You're right. You handled it badly, and apologies don't erase 6 months of Maya asking why Grandma doesn't love us anymore. But I'm accepting this settlement because fighting you would hurt my daughter more than it would hurt you, and she suffered enough already. Take your $200,000. Stay away from us. If Maya wants a relationship with you when she's older, I won't stop her. But you'll have to earn that, and money won't buy it. They left separately, Sarah walking into spring sunshine that felt thin and unconvincing. Climbing into the truck Walt had finally agreed to sell her for fair value once she'd explained she'd received a small inheritance. The lie sat bitter but necessary, Another layer of protection against the scrutiny wealth invited. She drove back to Ben, to the farmhouse that was home despite its age and quirks, found Maya playing in the yard with the chickens, joined her daughter in the dirt and feathers, without mentioning that they just guaranteed her access to college funds that would make Ivy League tuition look like pocket change. That night, after Maya fell asleep, Sarah opened the basement door and descended stairs that no longer terrified her. The hidden room remained sealed behind its brick wall, safe inside untouched, monument to William's fear and foresight. She didn't open it, didn't need to verify the empty space where wealth had waited. Instead, she stood in the darkness thinking about inheritance and what actually mattered, about money as tool versus identity, about the difference between having resources and being defined by them. Upstairs, Maya dreamed whatever 5-year-olds dream, protected by wealth she didn't know existed, growing up in a house that had sheltered desperation and transformed it into security without requiring them to become different people in the process. The foundation held, the walls stood, the roof kept out rain, and beneath it all, in the place where secrets had hidden, there was nothing left but space and the memory of what had been found when storms revealed what time had concealed. That seemed right somehow, seemed like the proper end to the story William had begun 77 years ago, when 4 engineers gambled everything on gold buried deep in Montana mountains, trusting that Earth held wealth for those patient and desperate enough to extract it. 6 months after the money arrived, Sarah drove a 5-year-old Toyota Highlander purchased used from a Ben dealership, lived in the same farmhouse, now weatherproofed and structurally sound, but not transformed into anything resembling a mansion, and still worked 3 shifts weekly at Frank's Diner because serving coffee to regulars who knew her face kept her tethered to reality in ways wealth couldn't replace. The financial advisors Rebecca had recommended managed the bulk of the settlement in conservative investments, municipal bonds, and index funds, generating returns that seemed obscene for doing nothing beyond existing. 50 million sat in portfolios Sarah barely understood. 11 million remained liquid for immediate needs and the foundation she'd begun planning. The William Mitchell Foundation, incorporated in August, dedicated to supporting single mothers facing homelessness, offering what no one had offered Sarah when Catherine Carter closed the door: actual help instead of judgment, resources instead of sermons about personal responsibility. The initial endowment of 15 million produced investment income around 1.2 million annually, enough to fund programs Sarah designed based on her own experience of what desperation actually required. Emergency housing grants covered security deposits and first month's rent. No questions beyond verified need. Legal aid connected women to attorneys who understood that escaping bad situations required paperwork and representation most couldn't afford. Job training partnered with Central Oregon Community College, taught trades that paid living wages. Childcare support made it possible to attend. Sarah hired a director to run operations, stayed involved in program design and funding decisions, but avoided making the foundation about herself. The name honored William. She acknowledged where the money originated, but the work focused on present need rather than past circumstances. The first year helped 127 families, modest numbers that felt more meaningful than the dollar amounts generating them. Every application Sarah reviewed carried echoes of her own story: women fleeing abuse or abandonment or simple bad luck, children who needed stability more than explanations of why their world had collapsed. One early recipient was Margaret Thompson, 34, 2 kids, living in her car after her husband's death from pancreatic cancer left her with medical debt that consumed their savings and destroyed her credit. Margaret's application arrived in October, 6 months into the foundation's operation, and something in the spare language describing her situation made Sarah request a meeting. They sat in the foundation's small office, converted from a barn on the farmhouse property, while Margaret's children played in the yard under Walt's supervision, his grandfatherly patience endless. Margaret's hands shook holding coffee Sarah had poured, exhaustion written into every line of her posture. "I don't know why I'm here. I don't take charity, but my kids need a place to sleep that isn't the back seat, and I can't get approved for an apartment without first and last month's rent I don't have." Sarah saw herself in March staring at $43, calculating survival in units too small to matter. This isn't charity. It's support while you rebuild. The foundation will cover your security deposit and 2 months' rent. We'll connect you with legal aid to handle the medical debt, work out payment plans or bankruptcy if that's appropriate. We have childcare grants so you can attend job training. Margaret's facade cracked, tears cutting tracks through makeup applied to hide exhaustion. Why would you do this? You don't know me. Because I lived in my car too. Different reasons, same fear. Someone helped me when I had nothing, so now I help others. That's how this works. The foundation placed Margaret in a two-bedroom apartment by November, enrolled her in medical coding training by December, provided 6 months of child care support while she completed certification. Sarah tracked her progress the way a general tracks critical operations, invested in the outcome beyond professional interest. 1 year later, Margaret sent a card. Job secured, 42,000 annually benefits, stability for the first time since her husband died. The gratitude expressed couldn't capture what the help had meant, but Sarah understood anyway, remembered what rescue felt like when you'd stopped believing it was possible. Stories like Margaret's accumulated through the first 3 years, became the foundation's actual currency beyond dollars distributed. The second year brought expansion, programs for formerly incarcerated mothers trying to reunify with children, partnerships with employers willing to hire women with gaps in work history. Year 3 added mental health counseling, recognizing that trauma didn't disappear when housing stabilized, that healing required more than a roof and income. The numbers grew. 300 families year 2, 500 year 3, success rates holding steady at 73%, maintaining housing stability after 12 months. But meaning didn't heal trauma. Sarah discovered that truth in therapy sessions that began 18 months after the settlement, when she finally admitted to Rebecca during a foundation meeting that she was sleeping poorly, startling at unexpected sounds, experiencing panic attacks triggered by nothing she could identify. Rebecca recommended her Ellen Zhao, a trauma specialist in Bend, who worked with domestic violence survivors and people displaced by sudden life changes. The first session felt like exposure, Sarah resisting the impulse to perform competence, to demonstrate she had everything handled despite evidence to the contrary. Dr. Zhao listened to Sarah describe Michael's death, the Carter family's slow-motion betrayal, the months of survival mode where every decision carried life or death weight, then the whiplash of sudden wealth that should have solved everything but somehow made the unprocessed grief and fear more acute. Trauma doesn't disappear because circumstances improve. Safety lets your body finally acknowledge what it suppressed during crisis. You spent 6 months in survival mode where breaking down wasn't an option. When did you actually process losing your husband, being abandoned by his family? Sarah's answer came out smaller than she intended. I didn't. There wasn't time. There's time now. That's what the panic attacks are telling you. The therapy took 2 years, sessions where Sarah cried more than she'd allowed herself during the actual crises, where she articulated rage at Catherine and grief for Michael and bone-deep fear that wealth would vanish as suddenly as it appeared. Dr. Zhao taught breathing techniques, somatic exercises, cognitive reframing, all the tools people who'd never been desperate might dismiss as self-help nonsense, but which actually helped when applied with discipline. Sarah learned that healing wasn't linear, that she could be grateful for rescue while still furious about needing it. The anger at Catherine proved most complicated to unravel. 3 years after the settlement, Sarah drove to Portland for a foundation conference, found herself parking outside the Carter house without planning the detour. She sat in the Highlander watching the house where she'd spent 18 months learning what family meant when filtered through resentment and obligation. Catherine's car occupied the driveway, everything looking exactly as it had the night Sarah left. The urge to knock, to confront, burned through Sarah's chest. Instead, she wrote on her phone, words that would never be sent but needed to exist. Catherine, I forgive you not because you've earned it, but because carrying anger was poisoning me. You threw me out when I needed family most. You hurt Maya in ways she's still processing. None of that is okay, but I'm choosing to release it because I refuse to let your cruelty define my life. I forgive you for me, not for you. She deleted the draft, drove away, felt lighter for articulating thoughts that didn't require Catherine's presence to be valid. Forgiveness, she was learning, was something you did for yourself, refusing to give those who had hurt you continued power over your emotional landscape. Maya's relationship with her father's family presented different complications. 4 years after the settlement, when Maya was 9 and old enough to have opinions about connection and distance, she asked why she never saw her grandmother or uncle or aunt anymore. Sarah had been preparing for this conversation, had discussed it with Dr. Zhao, but preparation didn't make the words easier. When Daddy died, his family had trouble dealing with their grief. They treated us in ways that weren't kind. I've forgiven them, but forgiveness doesn't mean pretending everything is fine. Maya processed this with the seriousness she applied to difficult concepts. Did they not want me? The question landed like a punch. They loved you. They just didn't know how to love us both at the same time, and they made choices that hurt us. But if you want to see them, I won't stop you. That's your decision to make. Do you want me to see them? Sarah chose honesty over comfort. I want you to have family who loves you well. If they can be that, yes, we'll figure it out together. 3 months later, Sarah contacted Ryan, the least hostile of Michael's siblings, proposed meeting for lunch in Portland. Ryan arrived looking older than his 40 years, carrying weight in his face that suggested intervening time hadn't been kind. They ordered sandwiches neither ate much of before Ryan finally addressed what mattered. I owe you an apology for how we treated you, for supporting Mom when she kicked you out. We were drowning in our own problems and took it out on you. Sarah appreciated the admission without fully trusting it. Apologies matter when they come with changed behavior. Are you different now? Ryan's laugh carried bitterness. I've had therapy, lost another job, hit bottom, dealt with my anger issues, found new work, been stable for 2 years. I can't undo what I did, but I'm trying to be better. Maya asked about you. She wants to know her father's family, and I won't deny her that unless you're going to hurt her. I can't speak for Mom or Lisa, but I'd like to see Maya. They established cautious contact, supervised visits initially, Sarah present to ensure Maya's emotional safety. Ryan showed up consistently, brought age-appropriate gifts, asked about Maya's interests rather than making everything about himself. The relationship built slowly over months, never reaching close but achieving functional. Family, Sarah was learning, wasn't binary between perfect and severed. Sometimes it existed in careful middle ground, where people who'd caused harm tried to do better. Catherine sent birthday cards each year, signatures that said simply, "Love Grandma Catherine." Lisa remained absent entirely. Sarah accepted these patterns as information about who people were, built her life around those willing to show up rather than waiting for those who wouldn't. 5 years after finding the hidden room, the foundation celebrated having helped 1,847 families achieve housing stability, 73% maintaining that stability 1 year later. The numbers represented success by any metric, but Sarah studied the 490 families who hadn't stayed stable, directed her team to analyze failure cases as rigorously as successes. Money solved some problems instantly and others not at all, and learning to distinguish between them required constant recalibration. Maya at 10 showed disturbing signs of understanding exactly how different their life was from most people's, coming home from school with questions about why they didn't live in a big house like her friend Emma's family. Sarah sat with her daughter in the renovated farmhouse that remained modest despite the wealth that could have transformed it. We have enough money that I could buy a mansion, but houses don't make families happy. Purpose makes people happy. We live here because great-grandpa William built something good, and I want to honor that. Having money means we get to help other families who are scared and struggling like we were. Maya absorbed this, expression serious beyond her years. Is that why you started the foundation? I started it to help people the way I wish someone had helped us, without conditions or judgment, just genuine support until they can stand on their own. But we had nothing, and now we have everything. How did that happen? Sarah had been preparing for this conversation. Great-grandpa William invested money in a mining company a long time ago. When he died, nobody knew about it because he'd hidden the papers. I found them when the storm knocked down that wall in the basement. The company was worth a lot of money. But the important part isn't how much we have, it's what we do with it. Maya considered this with the gravity she applied to math homework. Did the money make us different people? The question cut straight to everything Sarah had been wrestling with. No, it revealed who we already were. We were brave when we had $43. Now we're brave with millions of dollars. The number changed, but we didn't. That's what great-grandpa William wanted, why he hid the money instead of spending it. He understood that wealth tests character instead of creating it. The foundation continued expanding, Year 6 bringing collaboration with other organizations replicating the model, Year 7 adding scholarship programs for children of assisted families, Year 8 establishing permanent housing partnerships that moved beyond emergency assistance toward long-term stability. Maya grew alongside the work, volunteering at the foundation office during summers, understanding from observation what wealth meant when deployed with purpose versus consumed for comfort. Sarah returned to engineering part-time when Maya entered middle school, consulting on historic preservation projects, applying her expertise to keeping old buildings standing through methods that respected their history instead of erasing it. The work felt appropriate, echoes of what she'd done with her own life, taking something damaged and making it functional without destroying its character. She dated occasionally, brief relationships that never progressed to serious, finding that solitude suited her better than partnership after Michael. Some wounds heal but leave the landscape changed, and Sarah had made peace with being someone whose capacity for romantic trust had been permanently altered by loss. Walt died 3 years after the settlement at 94, his funeral drawing a crowd that testified to decades of quiet service. Barbara followed him 6 months later, the kind of death people called peaceful when they meant someone had given up after losing their partner. Sarah missed them both with an ache that time didn't diminish, missed Walt's steady presence during those early months when survival seemed impossible, missed the way they'd helped without making helping feel like charity. She established a scholarship in their names, funding tuition for students pursuing skilled trades, honoring the practical wisdom Walt had embodied. The foundation's 10th anniversary arrived with milestone numbers that felt both significant and insufficient. 4,200 families assisted, 74% success rate, expansion to 3 additional Oregon counties, partnerships with 12 employers committed to hiring program graduates. Sarah stood at the anniversary celebration, watching Maya, now 15, speak to donors about growing up understanding that wealth carried responsibility, that inheritance meant more than receiving money, but required transmitting values across generations. Maya's confidence at the podium reminded Sarah of Michael, the way he'd commanded rooms through quiet competence rather than showmanship. The resemblance brought familiar grief, softer now than in early years, but never entirely absent. Michael would have been proud of their daughter, would have supported the foundation's work, would have managed wealth with the same careful intentionality Sarah had learned to practice. His absence remained a presence in their lives, acknowledged in Maya's middle name, in photos displayed throughout the farmhouse, in stories Sarah told about the father Maya barely remembered but deserved to know. After the celebration, Sarah found Catherine standing near the dessert table, looking smaller than memory suggested, moving with the careful precision of someone unaware they occupied contested space. She'd been invited, an annual gesture Sarah made, knowing it would be declined, but this year Catherine had accepted, driven from Portland alone in a car Sarah didn't recognize. The foundation does important work. Michael would have been proud. Sarah accepted the observation without warmth or hostility, simply acknowledgement. Thank you for coming. It means something to Maya that you're here. Catherine's eyes moved to where Maya was talking with other young people, animated and confident. She looks so much like him, the way she carries herself. She does. She has his kindness too, and his tendency to see the best in people even when they don't deserve it. The barb landed gently, Catherine's wince acknowledging the hit. I know I don't deserve her forgiveness. Or yours. What we did, throwing you out, it was cruel, and I knew it was cruel even while I was doing it. Sarah had stopped needing Catherine's confession years ago, but hearing it still carried weight. Apologies don't erase harm, but they acknowledge it happened. That matters. Catherine left shortly after, hugged Maya with the awkwardness of limited contact, drove away into the evening. Sarah watched taillights disappear and felt nothing beyond mild relief that the encounter had passed without incident. Some relationships existed best at distance, maintained through birthday cards and occasional appearances rather than forced intimacy neither party actually wanted. Maya's teenage years unfolded with the remarkable normalcy Sarah had worked to preserve. High school bringing the standard complications of friendship drama and academic pressure and tentative experiments with dating. Sarah navigated it all with the intentionality she applied to foundation work, trying to ensure Maya understood both her privilege and her responsibility. That wealth made life easier but didn't exempt her from the work of becoming a decent human being. They argued occasionally about money, Maya wanting things her friends had, Sarah insisting on limits that felt arbitrary when bank accounts held millions. Why can't I get a new car for my 16th birthday? Emma's parents bought her a BM. Sarah kept her voice level through force of will. Because you don't need a BM. You need to learn that having money doesn't mean spending it on things that won't matter in 5 years. We'll get you a reliable used car that's safe. That's enough. But we can afford it. Affording something and needing it are different questions. Great-grandpa William could have lived in a mansion, driven luxury cars, spent everything he had on comfort. Instead, he lived modestly and hid wealth for someone who actually needed it. We honor that by not being wasteful. The argument repeated in various forms throughout high school, Sarah holding lines that felt important even when they frustrated her daughter. Maya graduated with honors, accepted admission to Oregon State studying environmental science, moved to campus while maintaining weekend involvement with foundation work. Sarah felt the absence acutely, the farmhouse too quiet without Maya's presence, but recognized this as healthy separation, the necessary process of launching children into independence. College brought Maya broader perspective, exposure to wealth disparities she'd understood intellectually but experienced viscerally through classmates struggling with tuition and food insecurity. She called Sarah one evening during sophomore year, voice carrying urgency. "Mom, I want to expand the foundation. Add programs specifically for college students. I've been researching. There are thousands of students who could finish their degrees if they just had help with housing or childcare or emergency funds. We have resources. We should use them." Sarah smiled at the phone, recognizing her own intensity reflected back. "Write me a proposal. Show me the research, the budget projections, how it would integrate with existing programs. If it makes sense, we'll do it." Maya submitted a 20-page proposal within 2 weeks, comprehensive and well-reasoned, demonstrating the kind of analytical thinking Sarah had hoped education would develop. The Foundation Board approved the College Assistance Program by unanimous vote, launched it the following fall, helped 115 students in the first year complete degrees they'd been forced to abandon due to financial crisis. The years accumulated, transforming Sarah from the desperate woman who'd counted $43 on a Portland sidewalk into someone whose life had achieved contours she could never have imagined that night. The Foundation's impact expanded beyond what initial endowment could have predicted, attracting additional funding from donors inspired by the model, growing to annual budgets exceeding $5 million. Sarah stepped back from day-to-day operations as Maya finished college and joined the leadership team, transitioning from founder to board chair, watching her daughter assume responsibility for work that had originated in Sarah's own desperation. 25 years after the November storm that had knocked down the basement wall and revealed what time had hidden, Sarah at 53 stood in the farmhouse kitchen watching Maya at 30 introduce little Sarah, 5 years old, named for her grandmother, carrying the same serious expression Sarah saw in old photographs of herself, to the house where 3 generations of Mitchell women had learned that survival required more than money could buy, but that money, properly used, could transform survival into purpose. Little Sarah peppered Maya with questions about everything: why the chickens were named after gemstones, whether the farmhouse was haunted, what the glass room in the basement contained. Maya answered with patient thoroughness, kneeling to her daughter's level, explaining complicated history and language a 5-year-old could process. Sarah watched from the kitchen doorway, coffee growing cold in her hands, seeing her own fierce protectiveness reflected in the way Maya responded to little Sarah's curiosity. They descended to the basement together, 3 generations, and stood before the glass wall that preserved the hidden room as memorial. Little Sarah pressed her face against the glass, studying the empty safe with the intensity children brought to things adults had learned to overlook. "Mommy, what's this room for?" Maya crouched beside her daughter, one hand on the glass separating them from the space that had changed everything. "This is where great-great-grandpa William hid something very important. Papers that showed he owned part of a mining company. When he died, nobody knew about these papers. Grandma Sarah found them during a storm, and that discovery helped our whole family. Why did he hide them? Sarah spoke before Maya could answer, moving to join them at the glass. Because he learned that when people know you have money, they treat you differently. Sometimes they become jealous. Sometimes they think they deserve what you have. He wanted whoever found this to need it badly enough that having it wouldn't corrupt them, wouldn't turn them into someone greedy or cruel. He was protecting not just the money, but the person who would eventually inherit it. Little Sarah processed this with the seriousness that ran through Mitchell women like genetic code. Did it corrupt you, Grandma? The question was so direct, so clear-eyed, that Sarah had to suppress a smile. I hope not. I try every day to use the money the way Great-Grandpa William would have wanted, to help people who need help, to raise your mother to understand that wealth is responsibility, not just comfort, to make sure our family remembers where we came from, even when we don't have to live that way anymore. Maya added her hand to the glass beside little Sarah's. 3 generations connected through barrier and memory. The money didn't make us better people, sweetheart. It revealed who we already were. Grandma was brave and resourceful when we had nothing. The money just gave her resources to be brave on a bigger scale, to help thousands of families instead of just our own. Little Sarah nodded, apparently satisfied, then pivoted with the lightning transitions unique to 5-year-olds. Can we feed the chickens now? They climbed back to daylight, Sarah moving slower than the other two, her knees protesting stairs in ways they hadn't when she'd first descended to that basement during the storm. Maya noticed, slowed her pace, offered an arm. Sarah waved away with more pride than wisdom. They emerged into afternoon sun that turned the farmhouse golden, illuminated the careful restoration that had preserved William's original vision, while making the structure sound enough to last another 70 years. Little Sarah raced toward the chicken coop, Maya following at the measured pace of mothers everywhere, trying to prevent their children from injuring themselves through enthusiasm. Sarah remained on the porch, watching them move through the yard, seeing in their interaction echoes of herself and Maya during those early months when survival had meant making games of poverty, when love had been the only resource they'd had in abundance. The chickens, Ruby, Opal, Pearl, Jade, Amber, scattered and regrouped as little Sarah shrieked with delight, scattering feed with wild abandon while Maya tried to teach proper technique. Walt's coop still stood sturdy, his construction having outlasted his life, testament to the kind of work people did when they built things meant to endure rather than simply meet minimum requirements. Sarah thought about him often, missed his steady presence, the way he'd helped without making helping feel like debt. The scholarship bearing his name had funded 83 students over the years, sending carpenters and electricians and plumbers into the world carrying skills that couldn't be outsourced or automated, honoring his belief that working with your hands held dignity that desk jobs sometimes lacked. The foundation had evolved beyond anything Sarah had initially envisioned, Maya's leadership bringing innovation and energy that complemented Sarah's careful caution. Programs now operated in 6 Oregon counties, had expanded to Washington and Idaho through partnership agreements, helped an average of 1,200 families annually. Success rates remained high, evidence that the model worked, that combining immediate crisis assistance with long-term support produced outcomes that justified the investment. The work would continue after Sarah's death, structured to survive transitions of leadership, funded beyond any single person's lifetime, monument to the understanding that wealth without purpose was just numbers and accounts growing larger while meaning atrophied. Maya returned to the porch with little Sarah, both of them laughing, the child's hands covered in chicken feed and dirt, her dress showing evidence of contact with everything in the yard. Sarah's instinct to protect clean clothes warred with the memory of Maya at the same age, equally filthy, equally joyful, learning that getting dirty meant you were actually living instead of just existing in careful preservation. We should probably get her cleaned up before dinner. Sarah shook her head, surprising herself. Let her be dirty a little longer. Childhood should include mud and chicken feathers. There's time for clean clothes. Maya smiled, understanding passing between them that didn't require articulation. Little Sarah, oblivious to adult complexity, discovered a particularly interesting rock and began explaining its geological significance with confidence, unwarranted by kindergarten education. Sarah and Maya listened with the patience adults reserve for children's certainties, correcting gently when correction was needed, mostly letting the enthusiastic lecture continue. The afternoon stretched toward evening, light softening to gold, then amber, then the purple of approaching dusk. Maya's husband called saying he'd started dinner. They should head home soon. Goodbyes were negotiated with little Sarah, who wanted 5 more minutes that became 10, then 15, before finally accepting that leaving was inevitable. She hugged Sarah with the fierce intensity of the very young, all sharp elbows and bony shoulders, and Sarah held her granddaughter thinking about continuity, about the way lives connected across decades through more than genetics, through shared experience of hardship overcome and values transmitted not through lecture, but through it. I love you, Grandma. Thank you for showing me the secret room. I love you too, sweetheart. Come back soon. They drove away, taillights disappearing down the dirt road that led to the highway, to Portland, to lives that would unfold in ways Sarah couldn't predict or control. Sarah remained on the porch until the taillights vanished completely, then moved inside where the farmhouse wrapped around her like a familiar coat, walls holding 25 years of transformation without losing the shape William had built. The basement door stood closed, and she felt no need to descend one more time to the glass-enclosed memorial. That room had already given everything it had to offer, revealed its secret when desperation made her humble enough to search, and now it existed as reminder rather than repository. She made tea at the kitchen table where William's stock certificates had first spilled their impossible promise, where she'd read his letter about wealth revealing character instead of creating it. The words had proven true in ways she couldn't have predicted that storm-torn November night, not because the money had transformed her into someone better, but because having it had simply given her larger canvas on which to paint the same values she'd carried when counting $43 on a Portland sidewalk. Maya would continue the foundation's work with the same fierce intentionality she brought to everything, would raise little Sarah to understand that inheritance meant transmitting principles across generations, not just transferring wealth. The chain would hold or break based on choices Sarah couldn't control, but she'd done her part. Proven William's gamble, demonstrated that finding fortune when you needed it most didn't necessarily corrupt if you'd already been tested by having nothing and discovered you were enough. Outside, darkness settled over land that had sheltered desperation and witnessed recovery, over Walt's chicken coop still standing sturdy, over the foundation's barn office where tomorrow's work waited. The basement held its empty safe behind glass, monument to what storms could reveal when time finally surrendered its secrets. And upstairs, Sarah climbed into bed thinking not about the wealth that had changed everything, but about the strength that had made the wealth possible. The resilience discovered on a sidewalk with a 5-year-old daughter and 3 garbage bags. The character William had trusted would be there when someone desperate finally found what he had hidden. She closed her eyes, the farmhouse creaking its familiar evening song around her, and slept the sleep of someone who'd survived her worst day and learned that survival itself was wealth no fortune could purchase.